There's a step back there. So what I'm going to do is briefly do a market update, cover the Innovation Award program, and an update on what's on our ROI Research. I think most of you know IDC has a lot of analysts around the world. Here's the different activities we do. We do attempt to track everything sold every quarter. The new thing that we have added here last year, or 2 years ago, was the whole big data HPDA program. But our group is now also doing cybersecurity as a new addition to the group, because we're seeing a lot of big data and HPC being injected into cybersecurity environments. Here's some recent government studies. The nice thing about most of the government studies is the results are available for the community as a whole. So as they complete, we'll be glad to provide that to everyone. The one that should be completed about the end of September is for the National Science Foundation. It's best practices in government and industry partnerships around the world. We're also doing our third cybersecurity study. Bob Sorensen will be doing an update on one of those, I believe, later today. So we have just a whole list of different ones, and I'll spend a little time on the ROI study that we're doing today. So as far as market update, in 2015, the market actually grew more than we expected. It landed $11.4 billion. The supercomputer segment's at $3.3 billion, which is a good high number, but it's lower than what it was a couple years ago on the supercomputer side. So some of the top trends here, as I mentioned, we saw actually 11% growth in revenues at the end of the day. 2016 is looking fairly strong, but right now we're expecting 2016 in the traditional 6% growth rate, maybe 5-6, because 2015 was so high. In all our market data, there has to be a buyer and seller. So if somebody builds their own system, we don't count that in our market data because there hasn't been a market transaction. And the new largest machine in the world, which is $330 million roughly, was self-built. In other words, the government funded one organization to build a machine, so you won't see that $330 million in our numbers. And that causes the growth rate to be a bit lower than that. The HPDA area, I think you've seen this chart a couple times. We're just reminding everyone, we've added 4 new verticals to our data tracking, and that's really its HPDA segments. Now, a lot of big data things are in the traditional modeling and simulation. So those fall in our regular categories, like whether it's automotive, aerospace, bio, life sciences. But these are the new categories we have as far as fraud and anomaly detection, marketing, and business intelligence. And in these cases, these are all areas where you're using both big data and high-performance computing together. That's our definition of HPDA. So here's how the market turned out as far as the different industrial sectors. You can see it was very robust as far as for a number of the segments here. Bio, life sciences, and CAE are doing considerably well right now. I mean, really healthy growth there. And the traditional government labs, university, and defense are doing very strong also. Now, here's the big change here, and of course in the last couple months even more changes here as far as the vendor changes with HP buying SGI. But some major shifts that are taking place here. IBM selling off its x86 business to Lenovo was a major shift that we saw over the last couple of years. But the biggest concern we have is if you take IBM's size as of 4 years ago and the combined IBM and Lenovo today, there's about 10 market share points that have been lost in that whole transitional period. And it's, of course, HP picked up quite a bit, but Cray's picked up, and all the other vendors have picked up, a fair amount of market share. And the Chinese vendors are doing extremely well. The other thing I should mention, in the other category, we're tracking right now, I believe, around 34 different vendors in the other category. The way our rules work is a vendor has to tell us it's okay to show their numbers publicly. So sometimes you'll see a vendor show up on our list, and then the next year you'll see them disappear. It's when the vendors asked us not to show their numbers. And in general, that means their numbers weren't as good as they wanted to see them. On a processor side, of course, x86 is doing extremely well right now. x86 is more than 90% of the market. The vector processors there are from NEC, who are still building some vector machines. The RISC Blue Gene, of course, ended in 2013, was the last installations of the Blue Gene processors. We're looking forward to see ARM show up on this chart sometime in the near future. And then on forecasts, why are we still projecting HPC to be a strong growth market? And what I mean by strong growth is if you look at all servers in general, they're growing on the order of 1 to 3% a year in that realm. HPC is growing generally between 6, 7, 8%. although HPC is very lumpy. But one reason is the lower half of the market is finally back to recovery mode. The lower half of the market still is not at its 2008 levels, so there's still room for a lot of growth there. It has become a very competitive weapon for the large centers, for competitors as far as an industry. And we're seeing the government procurements still growing dramatically, but what's going on there is they tend to lump together. So you see a big growth, and then you see a kind of quiet period, which we're hopefully at the end of right now as opposed to in the middle of, and then you see another spike taking place. And I believe over the next 6 months you're going to see a lot of announcements about what we think is going to be a major buy period. We think 2018 to 2020, in those 3 years, there will be just some massive spending are going to be taking place again. So here's our forecast right now. We are projecting about a 10% growth in the supercomputer segment. The one thing I always mention is the supercomputer segment, because those top 4 or 5 machines are causing a real roller coaster effect. Depending on which endpoints you pick, I can show supercomputers growing at 4% or 35% right now. And in some cases, we actually can show it almost at 60%, just depending on which endpoints you take. So we do a fair amount of time here to try to average that in the numbers. But we are forecasting right now roughly about just below 8% growth rate for the next 5 years. Now, everything I've talked about so far is the server side. On the storage, middleware application, and repair services, this is our forecast. At the moment, the highest growth rate part of the market continues to be storage. And the part that we still are struggling trying to figure out, and I've said this now for 2 years, is the storage portion is growing. There's much more purchases of it, but the storage vendors are not making much money and being as successful as we'd like to see. And we're trying to figure out what's going on with that dynamic. Originally we thought there was massive growth and a lot of competition and price cutting, but still growth, and eventually that would settle out. We're hoping that this year might be that settling out period, but we're trying to figure that part of the market out. So as I mentioned earlier, storage is the fastest growing segment right now. They keep hitting record levels, every time we run the numbers. We are just launching our end-user multi-client study. That's one where we do a large number of sites. We normally try to survey over 1,000 different systems, usually across 150 sites or so. And that's where we get the heavy tracking. And we just have some of the initial results coming back from that, and it still shows that the storage portion is growing very strongly. So in conclusion on the forecast section is we still expect it to be a strong growth market. The vendor share position shifted greatly in 2015, and we expect it's going to continue shifting some because the HP acquisition of SGI and the IBM Lenovo mix, we're not sure that that's settled out at this point in time. And with that, I'd like to spend just a couple minutes on the HPC Innovation Award. I think a lot of you have seen this before, so there's a nice glass trophy. We ask everyone to submit your best examples for this. And there's a submission form here at the website. And if you just go to the HPC User Forum website, you can click on boxes or type in Innovation Award. We've had a lot of winners so far. Here's in icon form and the chart form. So we're very pleased with all the different winners. We would like to see more submissions, though, because we'd like to hand out a lot more awards. And the last piece I'd like to cover is a quick update on our ROI research. One thing we've done is we've changed the terminology a little bit here. So the program, if you remember, is return on investment, and there's 2 parts. The financial return on investment, which is revenues, profits, cost savings over how much you spend on HPC. And the other one was the innovation return on investment. And that turned out to be very confusing to a lot of people. So we're going to be renaming that return on research. And what we mean by that is the innovation, the scientific discovery that you get from HPC. So that'll be the new way we term that portion of the model. And as usual, we want to always thank DOE for funding this. This is under a DOE grant. And the beautiful part of the DOE grant, it's the information is made public to the world. So everyone in the world can use it. Many centers around the world are actively using this for various things, and the number one thing they're using it for is to justify, buying more HPC systems and to show the value to their funders and everything else. The study background, as I mentioned, there's 2 models: the macroeconomic model that shows how traditional financial ROI, and then we have also 2 innovation indexes, and I'll walk through those real briefly. So one of the indexes is based on how important the innovation is, and the second one is how broadly it impacts, how many organizations. Does it only help one company? Does it help thousands of companies? And then everything can also be sorted by all these 7 categories. And we do make public the entire data set so people can sort it in whichever way somebody wishes to. The sample size that we have posted right now is 329 sites. There's 114 financial ROI examples and 215 innovation ones. We will soon release the update. It's over 400 examples. It's actually close to 450 examples in the next release. And the big news is the numbers actually are going higher. We're looking, we feel we need at least 1,000 examples to get stability in the numbers because the numbers still fluctuate. And the surprising part to us, we were expecting them to come down some, but they're actually going upward at the moment. So right now on these projects in our sample, for every dollar that's invested in HPC on a project, the average return in revenue is $673. So, in the investment world, that's just a phenomenal return to see. Now, part of the issue is these are still more success stories. We don't have the failure stories incorporated in yet. And then on the profit side or cost savings, for every dollar invested in HPC, $44 in profits or cost savings is returned. And the average investment per innovation is about $3.9 million. Now that varies tremendously between industry, academia, and government, which is another parameter you can search all the data and sort it on. The other outcome that we're trying to publish more on, and we're making some progress, is all these examples are actually separate success stories. Each one is a project on a system. It's not measuring a whole HPC system, it's individual projects. So we right now have over 400 different success stories. And we've only published out maybe 30 of them so far. We're trying to do better on that part. And so the other part is job creation. And right now, the numbers may not look large, but as we grow the sample, we hope that'll be much better. So we're tracking very much from these different investments, innovations, and how many jobs are created. And right now in the published database we have just under 3,000 job creations from these success stories. And here's the website. A recent change, so the original report is down at the bottom, the full report. The ROI models, that's the Excel pivot tables that you can sort everything on. And these are, I think, the first 18 success stories that we published in a pre-format. And we will be updating on a roughly quarterly basis all the new ROI data. So you can get the spreadsheet here with all the pivot tables and then an accompanying PowerPoint slide deck. And this is the one that right now has the 329 examples that will very shortly have the 450 examples. So if you have any questions, let us know. And with that, I would like to hand it back to Paul Muzio.